The story went that Sullen Grumble owed his ascent to a very particular occasion. There supposedly lived in the world some superior who suddenly began to worry that none of his subordinates loved him. "We do love you, Your Excellency," assured his subordinates. "So y'all say when nothing's happening," the superior insisted, "but if it comes to a real matter, not a one of you will sacrifice a little finger for me." Gradually, despite the protestations, this idea settled so firmly in the zealous superior's head that he decided to test his subordinates and sent out a call. "Whoever wants to prove that he loves me," he announced, "let him chop off the index finger of his right hand." No one hastened to the call, however. Some, the Sybarites, turned away, knowing that chopping off a finger is attended by pain. Others held back out of misunderstanding. They thought the superior was asking whether they were pleased with everything, and fearing to be taken for rebels, bawled, as was their wont, "We do our best, Your Excellency. Who wants to prove it? Step forward. Don't be afraid." The zealous superior repeated his call. This time, again, the answer was silence, or the same shouts which by no means settled the question. The superior's face first turned purple, then somehow drooped mournfully. "Scound!" But before he finished, a simple latrine scrubber, exhausted by rod beating, stepped from the ranks and cried in a loud voice, "I'll prove it." With these words, he put his finger on a plank and chopped it off with a dull cutlass. Having done that, he smiled. This was the only time in his much-flogged life when there was a glimpse of something human in his face. Many thought that he had performed this feat only to deliver his back from the rods, but no, some sort of idea had ripened in the latrine scrubber's head. Seeing the crushed finger that fell at his feet, the superior was amazed at first, but then lapsed into a sweet tenderness. "You've loved me," he exclaimed, "and I will love you 100-fold. And he sent him to Foolsburg. At the time, nothing was known for certain about communists or socialists or so-called nivellators in general. Nevertheless, nivellating did exist, and on quite a vast scale. There were nivellators of towing the line, nivellators of putting the screws to, nivellators of hedgehog mittens, etc., etc. But no one saw in it anything threatening to society or undermining its foundations. It seemed that if for the sake of equalizing him with his peers a person is deprived of life, that will not be of any great benefit to the person, but will be beneficial and even necessary for the preservation of social harmony. The nivellators themselves did not have the least suspicion that they were nivellators, but called themselves good custodians and caretakers who were zealous for the happiness of their subordinates and others subject to them. Such was the simplicity of morals at that time. Such was the simplicity of morals at the time that for us who have witnessed later epochs, it is difficult even to imagine those still recent times when every squadron commander, without calling himself a communist, regarded it as his honor and duty to be won from top to bottom. Sullen Grumble belonged among the most fanatical nivellators of that school. Having drawn a straight line, he intended to force onto it the whole visible and invisible world. And to make sure that it would be impossible to turn either back or forward or right or left, was this supposed to make him a benefactor of mankind? It's hard to answer this question positively. It is rather possible to think that there were no suppositions of any kind in his head. Only in recent times, almost before our eyes, was the notion of combining the idea of a straight line with the idea of universal happiness elevated into a very complex administrative theory not devoid of ideological subterfuge. But nivellators of the old school, like Sullen Grumble, acted in the simplicity of their hearts solely out of an instinctive aversion to curved lines and all zigzags and meanders. Sullen Grumble was a latrine scrubber in the fullest sense of the word. Not only because he had occupied this post in the regiment, but a latrine scrubber in his whole being, in his whole way of thinking. The straight line seduced him, not because it was the shortest. Shortness meant nothing to him, but rather because one could march and march along it for ages without ever getting anywhere. The virtuosity of the straight line, like the wooden stake, lodged itself in his lamentable head, and there sprouted a whole impenetrable web of roots and ramifications. It was a sort of mysterious forest filled with magical dreams. Mysterious shadows followed each other in single file, buttoned up, hair cropped, in uniform step and uniform dress, on and on. They were all fitted out with the same face, they were all silent in the same way, and they all disappeared in the same way. Where? It seemed that beyond this dreamily fantastic world there existed a still more fantastic chasm, which resolved all difficulties because they all disappeared into it all without a trace. When this fantastic chasm had swallowed up enough fantastic shadows, Sullen Grumble turned, if we may put it so, on his other side and began another identical dream. Again the shadows walked in single file, one after another, on and on. Long before arriving in Foolsburg, he had already composed in his head a whole systematic delirium in which all the details of this ill-fated future municipality were regulated down to the last dot. In this delirium, the approximate form of the town which he intended to present as exemplary was the following. In the middle, the square from which streets, or companies, as he mentally called them, radiate outwards. At some distance from the center, the companies are intersected by boulevards which form a double circle around the town and at the same time serve as a defense against external enemies. Then there are the suburbs, earthworks, and a dark curtain, which is the end of the world. No river, no brook, no ravine, no hill, in short, nothing that could serve as an obstacle to free marching has been envisaged. Each company is 40 feet wide, neither less nor more. Each house has 3 windows that give onto a front garden where grow meadow campions, Turks cap lilies, beetroot, and scarlet lichens. All the houses are painted a light gray, and though in nature one side is always turned to the north or east, and the other to the south or west, that has been ignored because it is supposed that all sides are lit by the sun and the moon in the same way and at the same time of day and night. In each house there lived 2 elderly people, 2 adults, 2 adolescents, and 2 children. Difference of sex being no embarrassment to them. Sameness of age is matched with sameness of height. In some companies live only tall ones, and others only short ones, or skirmishers. Children who at birth give little promise of being firm in adversity are put to death. The older unfit for work may also be put to death, but only when, in view of the local police chief, there is a surplus of workforce in the general economy of the town. In every house there is one representative of each useful animal, male and female, whose duty is first to do the work proper to them and second to multiply. The square is surrounded by stone buildings which house various public offices, namely administrative quarters and all sorts of arenas for teaching gymnastics, fencing, and infantry formation, for eating, for general genuflection, and so on. Public places are called headquarters, and those serving in them scribes. There are no schools, and literacy is not mandatory. The knowledge of numbers is taught on the fingers. There is no past or future, and therefore chronology is abolished. There are 2 feasts. The one in spring, just after the snow melts, is called the Feast of Steadfastness, and serves as preparation for future adversities. The other, in the fall, is called the Feast of the Powers That Be, and is dedicated to the memory of already experienced adversities. These feasts differ from ordinary days only in a more intense exercise of marching. Such was the external organization of this delirium. Then he had to regulate the internal arrangement of the living beings caught up in it. In this respect, Sullen Grumble's fantasy reached a truly amazing precision. Each house was none other than a residential unit, which had its commander and its spy. He insisted particularly on spies, and belonged to the group of 10 that was called a platoon. The platoon, in turn, had a commander and a spy. 5 platoons made a company, 5 companies a regiment. There were 4 regiments which formed first, 2 brigades, and second a division. Each of these formations had a commander and a spy. Then followed the town proper, which was renamed and now called not Foolsburg, but the town of Steadfastia, to the eternally illustrious memory of Grand Prince Sviatoslav Igorovich. Over the town in a cloud hovers the mayor, which is to say the commander-in-chief of the land and sea forces of the town of Steadfastia, who disputes with everybody and lets them all feel his power. Beside him, a spy. In each residential unit, time is allocated most strictly. Everyone in the house gets up with the rising of the sun. Adults and adolescents put on the same clothes after special designs certified by the mayor, straighten themselves and tighten their belts. The babies hastily suck at their mother's breasts. The elderly utter a brief homily that always ends with an unprintable word. The spies hasten with their reports. Within half an hour, only the elderly and the babies remain in the house, all the rest having already gone to do the duties that have been laid on them. First, they go to the arena for genuflection, where they quickly recite a prayer. Then they direct their steps to the arena for bodily exercise, where they strengthen their bodies by fencing and gymnastics. Finally, they go to the arena for taking meals, where they get a piece of dark bread sprinkled with salt. After the meal, they form up on the square by platoons, and from there, led by their commanders, they march to the public works. The work is done on command. The townsfolk bend down and straighten up in unison. The blades of the scythes gleam. The rakes swing up and down. The spades pound. The plows furrow the earth. All on command. The plows trace monograms. The first letters of the names of historic figures who are most famous for their steadfastness. Next to each working platoon, a soldier with a rifle marches up and down and every 5 minutes shoots at the sun. Amid these swingings, bendings, and unbendings, Sullen Grumble promenades along a straight line, all sweaty, all filled with barrack stench, and strikes up. 1, 2, 1, 2, and the workmen all join in. Heave ho, swing it, heave ho. But now the sun reaches its zenith. The Sullen Grumble shouts, knock off. Again, the people line up by platoons and return to town, where they proceed in a ceremonial march through the arena for taking meals, and they each get a piece of black bread with salt. After a brief rest, which consists of marching, the people line up again and, as in the morning, are taken to work until sunset. At sunset, everyone gets one more piece of bread and hurries home to sleep. During the night, the spirit of Sullen Grumble hovers over the Steadfastia and vigilantly keeps watch on the sleep of the townsfolk. No God, no idols, nothing. In this fantastic world, there are no passions, no interests, no attachments. They all live together every minute, and each one feels alone. Never for a moment does life digress from fulfilling a countless number of idiotic duties, which are devised beforehand and weigh on every one of them like fate. Women have the right to bear children only in winter, because the violation of this rule may disrupt the smooth course of summer work. Young people are associated with each other only according to height and build, so that they correspond to the demands of a regular and attractive front. Nivelation, simplified to a strict ration of black bread, that is the essence of this soldierly fantasy. Nevertheless, when Sullen Grumble expounded his delirium to his superiors, not only were they not alarmed, but they looked with astonishment, amounting almost to awe, at the obscure latrine scrubber who had made a project of ensnaring the universe. The formidable mass of efficiency, acting as one person, struck the imagination. The whole world was pictured as covered with black dots on which people move to a drumbeat along a straight line and go on and on. Those settlement units, those platoons, companies, regiments, all this taken together. Does it not imply the existence of some radiant horizon, which is covered in fog for now, but in time, when the fog lifts and the horizon is revealed? What, however, is this horizon? What is concealed in it? Barracks, the imagination, aroused to the point of heroism, responded quite definitely. Barracks, the sullen latrine scrubber repeated in his turn like an echo, accompanying this word with such an outlandish oath that the superiors felt as if they had been scorched by some mysterious fire. Having dealt with melancholy and dispersed the insane gathering, Sullen Grumble immediately set about realizing his delirium. But as Foolsburg presented itself to his eyes, the town was far from corresponding to his ideals. It was more a disorderly pile of huts than a town. There was no clear central point. The streets went every which way. The houses were disposed anyhow, without symmetry, sometimes closed together, sometimes leaving huge vacant lots in between. Consequently, he was faced not with improving, but with creating anew. But what was the meaning of the word create in the mind of a person who from early youth had been seasoned in the duties of a latrine scrubber? To create meant to imagine that you are in a thick forest. It meant to take an axe and, waving this instrument of creativity right and left, to go steadfastly wherever your feet carry you. This was exactly what Sullen Grumble did. The day after his arrival, he went around the whole town. Neither the crooked streets, nor the great number of little nooks, nor the way the townsfolk's huts were scattered. Nothing stopped him. One thing was clear to him. Before his eyes was a thick forest, and he had to deal with this forest. Having encountered some irregularity, Sullen Grumble fixed his puzzled gaze on it for a moment. Then at once came out of his stupor and silently gestured forward, as if projecting a straight line. He walked like that for a long time, his arms stretched forward and projecting, and only when a river appeared before his eyes did he sense that something extraordinary had taken place in him. He had forgotten. He had never anticipated anything like that. Up to then, his fantasy kept going straight on a level surface. It removed, it dissected, and raised up instantly, knowing no obstacles and nourished only by its own content. And suddenly a meandering strip of liquid steel flashed in his eyes, and not only did it not disappear, but did not even stop under the gaze of his administrative basilisk. It went on moving, heaving, and producing some special but unquestionably living sounds. It was alive. "Who's there?" he asked in horror. But the river went on murmuring, and in its murmuring could be heard something seductive, even sinister. These sounds seemed to be saying, "Clever is your delirium, latrine scrubber, but there is another delirium which may be more clever than yours." Yes, this too was a delirium, or better, here two deliriums stood face to face, one created personally by Sullen Grumble, and the other which burst from somewhere and declared its total independence from the first one. "What for?" Sullen Grumble, his eyes directed at the river, asked the accompanying policeman. Once the first moment of stupefaction had passed, the policeman did not understand. But there was in the mayor's eyes something which so completely precluded any possibility of avoiding an explanation that they decided to respond even without understanding the question. "The river, sir. The dung, sir," they mumbled at random. "What for?" he repeated in dismay. And suddenly, as if afraid of going more deeply into the question, did an abrupt about-face and went back. With fitful steps, he returned home, muttering under his nose, "Subdue it! I'll subdue it!" At home, it took him only a minute to resolve the matter in principle. He had before him two equally great feats, to destroy the town and to remove the river. The means for accomplishing the first feat had been thought out over beforehand. The means for accomplishing the second still seemed unclear and confused, but since there was no power in nature that could persuade the latrine scrubber of his ignorance of anything whatsoever, the ignorance in this case was not only tantamount to knowledge, but was in a certain sense more solid. He was neither a technician nor an engineer, but he had the firm soul of a latrine scrubber, and that was also strength of a sort which could enable him to conquer the world. He knew nothing either about the origin of rivers or about the laws of their flowing down and not up, but he was sure that he needed only to point out from here to here, and in the allotted space a continent would certainly emerge, and then the river would continue to flow as before, to the right and to the left. Having arrived at this thought, he began to prepare, immersed in some sort of wild reverie. He wandered the streets, his hands behind his back, muttering incoherent words under his nose. On his way, he was met by townsfolk dressed in rags of all sorts who bowed very low to him. He stopped before some of them, fixed an uncomprehending gaze on the rags, and uttered, "What for?" And again, lapsing into reverie, he continued on his way. The moments of this reverie were most oppressive for the Foolsburgers. They froze before him as if transfixed, unable to tear their eyes from his brightly steely gaze. There was concealed in this gaze some inscrutable mystery, and this mystery hung over the whole town like a heavy, almost leaden canopy. The town wilted, the air felt stale and stuffy. He had not yet given any orders, had not uttered any thoughts, had not informed anyone of his plans, but everyone already understood that the end had come. They were convinced of it by the constant flitting about of the idiot who carried the mystery in him, convinced of it by the soft growling coming from inside him. Unperceived by anyone, a vague terror crept among the townsfolk and took absolute possession of them all. All mental powers were concentrated on the mysterious idiot, and in tormenting anxiety they turned in one and the same magic circle of which he was the center. People forgot the past and gave no thought to the future. They reluctantly did necessary everyday chores, reluctantly came together, reluctantly lived from day to day. Why so? That was the one question clearly rising before everyone at the sight of the idiot appearing in the distance. Why live if life is forever poisoned by the notion of the idiot? Why live if there is no means of shielding one's eyes from his terrible ubiquitousness? The Foolsburgers even forgot their mutual disagreements and hid in the corners in anxious expectation. It seemed he himself realized that the end had come. He was not taken up with any current affairs and never even stopped by the office. He decided once and for all that the old life had irrevocably sunk into oblivion, and therefore there was no need to mess with this trash that had no relation to the future. The policemen suffered morally and physically. With bated breath, they stood at attention on the line along which he walked and waited to receive orders, but there were no orders. He silently passed by without even deigning to glance at them. There was no justice in Foolsburg, either merciful or unmerciful, either speedy or slow. At first, the Foolsburgers, from an old habit, began to address him with their old claims and complaints against each other, but he did not even understand them. "What for?" he said, looking the plaintiff up and down with some sort of wild amazement. The Foolsburgers, dismayed, looked back and were horrified to see that indeed there was nothing there. Finally, the terrible moment came. After a brief hesitation, he decided thus: first to destroy the town and then accost the river. Obviously, he still hoped that the river would come to its senses on its own.